Before Elias Ginko was a Pokemon professor, before his name headlined conferences and Pokemon genetics journals, he was just another overworked doctoral candidate, buried in data and surviving off caffeine. It was his second year at the Kanto Pokemon University, his dream school, and he was fully dedicating himself to his research to prove himself as one of this generation's greatest researchers. It was during this time that he met her, Clara Moreau. She was a transfer student from the Kalos region, with a sharp wit, sharper mind, and a reputation for dismantling egos in lab meetings. They'd first met at a seminar he was presenting on gene regulatory networks. Dense, theoretical, and by his own admission, dry. Clara, however, was wide awake, annoyingly so, as she was constantly peppering him with questions. Your model assumes miRNA feedback suppression is linear. Aren't you ignoring temporal load balancing in the post-transcriptional phase? Elias blinked. Her previous questions had been annoying him a bit as it was undermining his authority on the subject throughout the seminar, but this was the first time that he didn't have a quick answer to her question. She was right. Elias scratched his head. Well, I suppose you're right, Miss Moreau. It seems I'll have to go back to the drawing board on that theory. Elias wrapped the seminar up shortly after and hurried out, feeling humiliated but simultaneously impressed by Clara's understanding of the topic. Over the next couple months, he would see her now and then in classes or on campus. Frequently, as Elias went for a coffee refill, he would see her in passing during burning the midnight oil during working in one of the research labs afforded to students of the university. Months later, Elias received a massive opportunity. The Cantonian government had funded a research study on prenatal genome stabilization. This research would focus on how Pokemon genetics were formed while still in the egg state. Elias needed people to help him, and he couldn't afford to mess up on his first big opportunity. The first person he trusted to know as much, if not more than himself on the topic, was Clara Moreau. Things were tense at first. Clara wasn't one to suffer foolishness and was quick to correct him on anything he said or did incorrectly. It was aggravating for Elias at first, but he quickly found that with her help he was making great advancements in his research. Tense collaboration became late nights spent over data visualizations, disagreements softened by shared exhaustion, and hours lost to arguments that always ended in mutual respect. And secretly, admiration. They weren't a perfect pair. Elias was intense, obsessive, and prone to retreating into his thoughts. Clara, meanwhile, carried a quiet grief. Her younger brother had died at 6 from a rare genetic disorder for which there was no cure. She got into the field to try and find the genetic parallel between her brother's disorder and the Pokemon world. Her drive to find a cure for his disease was what brought her to where she was today. She didn't speak of him often, but when she did, her voice trembled with fury and love. While Ginko strived in his research for his quest towards fame and recognition, Clara was purely devoted to saving the lives of others who may have otherwise been written off. Their relationship started gradually, less of a spark than a slow, certain ignition. Their first kiss happened at 2:17 a.m. in front of the centrifuge where they'd just ruined their last viable sample. Clara cursed in Kalosian slang, while Elias collapsed in his chair and out of exhaustion and aggravation laughed for the first time in days. Clara snapped her fingers. Hey, great and powerful Pokemon Professor, don't go giving up before you see this. Elias took his head out of his hands and looked up, just as Clara swooped quickly in and pecked him on the lips. Think you have it in you to try this experiment again? She asked with a wry smile. You just kissed me, Ginko said as he held a hand to his lips and stared at her wide-eyed. And is that enough motivation for you to try and help me through this? Clara asked with a mischievous glint in her eye. They married 3 years later, after they'd both graduated. It was a quiet ceremony, at a civil office in Saffron City. No rings, just a vow between the two of them. No matter what happens, we'll always work together. We'll always tell the truth. They both kept that promise until Elias Ginko made a decision that he could never take back. 4 years later, Elias stood in front of Clara's favorite tree, just outside of Hidden Break Town, on a cliff overlooking the sea. They'd spent hours here before, picnicking, reading, napping in the shade. Now all that stood here was a gravestone. Elias stared back at the reminder of his life's greatest mistake, for a while, before turning around and making his way back to his lab. His lab in Hidden Break Town still showed many signs of their shared life. Post-it notes about enzyme markers stuck to the fridge, annotated papers in the bathroom, a half-completed crossword in her handwriting on the kitchen table. Elias never erased any of it. He couldn't. As he looked out the window of his lab, he saw the local kids playing. Along and Walker were chasing after one another with sticks, while Darryl could be seen sitting under a tree reading a book, but every now and then he'd steal a glance over the two other boys. Ginko watched for a minute more before collapsing on the ground, sobbing silently into his hands. He knew he still had so much work to do, but he would do it for Clara.